Welcome to the Inside Scoop, your one-stop shop for cracking the leadership code. Have you ever wondered what those conversations are like in the boardroom? Curious about the secret sauce successful executives possess? On the Inside Scoop podcast, we sit down with successful executives, getting their unique perspective on what it takes to be a good leader. They'll share their hard-won wisdom, the crucial competencies needed to thrive as a leader, and the unexpected lessons learned along the way. Here, we unlock the secrets of the executive suite. We get the inside track directly from the leaders themselves. In each episode, we'll dissect the essential skills needed to go from manager to leader, offering a leader's perspective on the challenges, triumphs, and unexpected wisdom they've acquired. The Inside Scoop, leadership lessons, served fresh.
Glad you joined us for this episode of the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Eduardo Bryant. Today, we have an outstanding show for you. It is how to go from manager to leader. Our guest is Kvam. Now, he is the Chief Operating Officer at Concur. This guy has seen, done, and knows it all with a perspective that can help anyone who is either new to management or been in management for a while. Your journey is just beginning. This podcast, it's available anywhere where you get your podcast. And if you hear or see something that you find to be inspiring, that you can relate to, we encourage that you subscribe and become part of our viewing audience. Now, without any further ado, let's welcome in our guest. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Eduardo. Very happy to be here today.
Well, we are glad and happy to have you. We'll talk a little bit about all the things that you do, but just knowing that the brand name of Concur, trust me, almost all of us have used it, myself included. But before we get to any of that, I always like to ask my guests what they're reading, simply because as an executive like yourself, being in that C-suite space, certainly you're doing things to stay on top of your game, to make sure that your skills are sharp. So share with the audience, what are you reading right now?
No, absolutely. So I guess a couple things to note. I did actually retire this January. So I'm in I have the luxury of being able to have time. And at the beginning of that retirement, I made a goal of trying to read 10 books this year. Now, once I got into it, and my family knows there's an inside joke that the last book that I read for pleasure was probably Call of the Wild in seventh grade. So as I started digging in a little deeper, I did come across something I think was incredibly helpful for me. There's an app that I found, it's called Abstract. And what the app does is it summarizes some of the top business books into about 15-minute audio books. They do a great job at summarizing some of the key points in the book, and it has given me really an ability to reflect on my journey working at SAP Concur and think about the material I'm learning and how would I have done things differently had I known what I know now. And so some of the books that I've recently listened to, I did a refresher on 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That's one I've always really enjoyed. I read a book, or listened to a book, I should say, on fueling compensation, like how to drive the behavior of the teams. Really good book that I read was A Guide to Developing Leaders. And then one that I found that was very interesting, and I think it's more relevant now. I read a book or listened to a book on tech-powered sales. As you look at the changes in the marketplace over the last probably 10 years, sales technology has become a more intricate part of how buyers learn about products. And so understanding how to weave together the various types of technology to be able to drive, I'm going to say, a more efficient sales process. So those are some of the things I've listened to and have really caught my attention. And goal for this early stage of retirement is just to try and put together my thoughts on how would I apply some of these new things in a possible future career. So hopefully that gives you some background.
Oh, it definitely does. And those are some timeless classics. I mean, I think we've all read the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And I think that that's a good one because it really kind of helps to frame where we're going to go. And our topic today, all about how do you go from being a manager, certainly into leadership? We all know that there's a difference between a manager and a leader. And even though you have hung up your your hat and decided that you're going to enjoy some R&R with your family is awesome. But the tools and the knowledge that you've gained over a illustrious career are things that will be with you forever. Plus, I am so honored to have you to share some of those pearls of wisdom even here on this podcast today, because I think there's a lot of people that you're going to help today, and it's going to be very beneficial. So, what I'd like to do is I'd like to have you talk about all of that in the form of sharing your story. I'm sure to get to the chief operating officer position, it was not a linear path. There was probably some curves and some bends, and you may have dropped off a cliff or two and got back up and picked yourself up by your bootstraps and made some mistakes and done a few things right, but ultimately landed at a very, very sweet spot and then being an executive as well. So if you would, Eric, take a moment, share your journey with the audience of how you got to where you are.
I absolutely happy to share. In fact, this is something that I used to share in small bites with members of my team because I think it helped them recognize that, you know, while I may have had a successful career, there were plenty of things along the way that were, I would say, would by all accounts be considered abysmal failures. And many of the things that I think helped me be a successful leader later in my career are things that I did very, very early that gave me an opportunity to just sort of test out my ability to lead in situations that weren't critical part of a business, but just in volunteer activities and things outside of work. So I think probably the best place to get started is with one of my first, I'm going to call it monumental failures. And that was, I don't know how many people on the phone, were 4.0 students or always had great grades, but I had been a very successful student in high school, but as a sophomore at Iowa State, I found out that, college can be much more difficult if you're not disciplined about your approach. And as a sophomore at Iowa State, I finished my first semester, first semester of my sophomore year with a 1.8 GPA. Fortunately for me, I actually dropped a 5 credit physics class. Otherwise, my GPA would have been well below 1. When you have something like that happen to you early, where you don't really have a great deal of confidence, there's a lot of fear that comes with the potential for flunking out. Frankly, just the embarrassment of failing really made me do a lot of soul searching. And I think that was early enough that I knew I needed to change my habits, that the things that I was doing were absolutely contributing to, me doing this again. So at the time, I committed to changing my habits. This is during a period where Franklin planners were kind of a new thing and the training around Franklin and time management. So I committed to, I'm going to really dig into this. I'm going to live my life in a way that's very organized and structured. I'm going to box myself to how can I be successful. So I listened to the tapes religiously. I did sit down as a sophomore in college and set my long-term goals. I did block time every Monday where I'd review what my schedule was for the week, and the following week I would update everything. I'd force myself to get up, go on campus at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I would not leave campus until 5 o'clock that day. I would get the material that I needed to have read in between classes. And there was no going back to the dormitory or going back to the fraternity and screwing around. I stayed on campus and I treated it like a job. And it got me to go from, struggling and cramming to being uber prepared. And the confidence that gives is incredible. I went from a 1.8 to a 3.8. I was, an A- short away from getting a 4.0. And I was the exact same person. I just changed my habits and I was committed to forcing myself to basically stay in a little bit more structured process. So the lesson I took away, and this was an early one, is that, how we set goals, how we manage our time, it impacts success in every aspect of our lives. And I've continued to follow these basic rules, and honestly, they've worked for me both personally and professionally. So as I get up every Monday, I spend a good 2 hours, even as a retired person, outlining the things that I want to accomplish and what things are important to me. And the to-do lists that get built, they're very much based upon what things I really want to accomplish. So hopefully that helps kind of paint a picture for you, Eduardo.
It paints a very clear and vivid picture because I can only imagine not everybody's a 4.0. I've got two kids in college, and both of them are like 4.0 and 3.9. And I'm thinking to myself, how in the world are you guys doing it? And one plays professional foot or college football, excuse me, at the collegiate level. Both
Yeah.
of them are big time athletes. And I'm like, how are you guys doing this? And so it can be a challenge. But I love what you talked about, those Franklin planners when they came out. People did jump on that and really started using it. And just to hear you say that you still apply that principle today, every morning. I'm a to-do list guy as well. And I think that helps to structure us. When you think about being in some type of management role, it becomes very tactile. You do things. You do this, you cross the T, you dot the I. So management is not only managing people, but certainly, like you talked about, it's managing your time, your to-do list. And that starts to slide a little bit into, okay, now I'm a successful manager. Now, how do I become a successful leader? Because those two things are very different. I can only assume that in your career, you went from management to leadership at some point. There was a crossover.
100%. And I think um, I'm gonna take a step back because I think sometimes the things that you do early, the opportunities and the experiences that you have before you're in a leadership role, set the table for you to have greater success. Um, and if you haven't put yourself in the situation in some capacity prior to doing it, it really can be a bit of a science project. So I'm going to take a step back and I'll even go back to the same, I would say almost the same period, which is when I was in college. Um, I think when people, and me personally, when I started to find success in the classroom, when I really understood how to manage my time, I started looking for other opportunities for growth. And there are lots of opportunities out there. I happened to be in a fraternity at the time. So at the time, I interviewed to be the recruiting chairman. I didn't really know a great deal about it, but I did think, okay, this gives me an opportunity to test out my time management skills. It allows me to get some basic selling skills. I really didn't think I wanted to be a salesperson, but I thought this could be something that would be interesting. I found that the work was not easy, but I did get a lot of satisfaction out of it. I enjoyed connecting with people, helping them see that, being a part of fraternity, it's more than what people might expect, and it does offer opportunities for growth. Fortunately for me, I actually was reasonably good at it. My success as a recruiter did give me an opportunity to run for the president of the chapter, and luckily I won. Now, when you step into a role like that, and I would say any volunteer organization, when you're organizing 100 plus people, trying to figure out how to get them to stay focused on any goal, getting people to commit time and effort to something that they're not compensated for, it gives you a very good sort of testing ground to see how do I motivate and influence people when I don't have a carrot and I don't have a stick. The only thing I can use are words to try and convince people that spending time, effort, and energy in this area is more valuable than doing what they would probably be doing otherwise. So I really started looking at it as, if there was a lesson I would take away from this, it's just, as someone who may not be in a leadership role, I would just encourage you to take the opportunity to lead in a volunteer group. And it will give you an opportunity to expand your skills with setting goals and organizing people and helping connect with the people on how do we accomplish a common goal. And so that early experience is, as I would say, parochial or juvenile as that may have sounded, it really did give me kind of a comfort level that that's something that I could do. And it gave me some things that I learned that were both positive and negative. So again, very early at this point, I had not even stepped into into a career, but I think those volunteer opportunities that exist out there are really, really good breeding grounds for people to be able to build that skill. Hopefully that helps a bit.
Oh, it does. So when you think about in your career, the management aspect of your career, and then of course sliding into leadership, was there someone or maybe an event that kind of gave you what you needed, as an example, some way for you to make a mark and to make a change so that you could see the difference between the management aspect of it and what leadership really looked like?
So I guess I would probably point to one of the first individuals that I really saw um, helped me see what a good leader looks like and gave me an opportunity to try and emulate that. Um, I'll sort of skip forward a bit in terms of some of my early career, and I'll simply say, um, probably in my late 20s, I worked at the Principal Financial Group, and I worked more in a programmer role. I was, I would say, given the benefit of leading a project that involves basically looking at business intelligence tools. Um, I could see how this type of technology would really be able to help an organization like ours, and I could see why companies were interested in it. So I took the initiative to really try and get an opportunity to work at that company. The company that I'm speaking of was Cognos at the time, and I took a job in their implementation area. When I started there, I could see very quickly the excitement, the fun of being able to take something like this that was truly groundbreaking for companies and be able to put it in the hands of a customer. And so I focused very hard on trying to move into a sales executive role. And along the way, I'll just touch on one of the leaders I worked with early that gave me my first shot as a solutions consultant and also gave me my first shot in sales. The gentleman's name was Dave Foth. Um, Incredible leader. The thing that really did sort of stick out to me is that I had moved from an implementation role where I knew the product very well to a solutions consulting role. And I made the assumption that this transition should be easy. I already know so much about the product. I should be able to step in and present the product and be able to help Dave and the rest of the sales team be very successful. What I found out very quickly is that when you're positioning products that have 1,000+ features, um, you can't show all of them. You really do need to take a few moments to be able to understand what the client's needs are, and you need to be very focused about what's important to the client. And Dave was the master at constantly being on message. He asked me to demonstrate the product, and as I would go through, he would actually simulate what it was like to be in front of a very difficult and hostile prospect, and he would throw me curveballs left, right, and center. He kept me on my game, and he simply helped me learn how to make sure I understand what was important, and B, how could I repetitively make sure I kept that theme front and center so that as the customer walked away, it was crystal clear why Cognos was the right solution for them. Another thing Dave did that I saw that really helped me see him as more than just I'm going to say a manager and more of a leader is that he had the patience to watch our team go do a C+ job in front of a customer, but then take time to be able to teach us, in many cases, the minor adjustments that were necessary to take what was a C+ behavior and turn it into an A player. And that is very difficult. Through my early career, I saw several leaders that, they may have had individual success because they were able to step in and I'll call it super rep an opportunity where frankly the rep gets pushed to the side and the manager takes over. Usually when you look, you see very inconsistent performance across the team. When I looked at Dave's team at the end of the year, and I was a solutions consultant just watching it, Dave got 6 out of 6 people to club, not by a little, but by a lot. When you walk away and you look at what he did as he left, because he did leave the organization, unfortunately, at the end of that year, all good people do move on at some point. He left a group of people that were very equipped to be able to go take that next step in their career. He helped create the next level of leader. The key things I took away from working for Dave, when you're working with customers and they're looking at a lot of different options, they are overwhelmed with information. They are absolutely swimming in data. Being an effective communicator, and this was his biggest thing, is you really need to understand what the client needs. You got to be able to summarize what are those unique benefits. You're going to be showing them a ton of things, but you got to be repetitive and bring it back to the 2 or 3 themes that are important to this customer. And number 2, great leaders are not doers, they're teachers. And when they can get people to open up, trust them, and take a leap of faith in changing the way they do something, you can see some really incredible results. So Dave's probably one of the first people that I saw where I'm like, I want to emulate this guy. I want to see if I can do more than what he did. But at the time, I'm like, he walked on water in my mind.
You said something in there that I thought was really key. You said that managers are doers and leaders are teachers. And those are some great examples of real leadership. As I was listening to you, I was reflecting and even thinking about my very first opportunity to witness good leadership. And that was my freshman year in college. I worked for the Hyatt Regency Hotel. I was a front desk clerk, checking guests in, checking guests out. And our rooms exec was a real visionary, a true leader. We had a front desk manager that was just doing the day-to-day stuff. Like you said, they're doers. Our rooms exec took our front desk manager and swapped that person with the housekeeping manager, just completely swapped their roles. So now the front desk manager is managing all of the housekeepers. And of course, the housekeeping manager now comes up to the front desk and is now managing all of us who are checking people in and out. And at 18 years old, a freshman at college, I went to the Ohio State University. And learning all of this stuff, we all thought that was the silliest, dumbest thing that could ever be done. But that's because we didn't see the wisdom. We were not looking at it from a leadership, we were looking at it from a management standpoint. He made that swap, not because the housekeeping manager knew how to check people in, because that person did not. We had to teach everything. And that's why we thought it was just the dumbest thing that could ever be done. But in leadership, it's not about doing, it's about teaching. And what the housekeeping manager was able to teach us, our current front desk manager could not. So the move was brilliant. And of course, we learned so much, like you talked about, Dave teaching so much that when he retired, he had left a legacy of people who were well equipped. That's the stuff that we're talking about. So when we think about this whole leadership space, it's not about being, and I love your phrase, a super rep, because we see that all the time. When they're trying to help pull the deal across the finish line, a manager steps in and they take over the call and they close it, and now everybody's happy, except not their job. Yeah, they felt the urge to save the deal. I get that, but your job is to teach. And if you were a really good leader, then you'd be able to teach your people on how to do that. I suspect you really were a good leader.
I'm going to say I did reasonably well, but like I said, I was able to draw from the experience I had working for several people where I had challenges that I was completely unaware of. And I think good leaders can see what is it that's holding back the people on their team, and they're willing to invest time, energy, money to try and get those people to just see how to change their behavior, how to do something in a new way. I talked about my first big failure in the beginning. My second one sort of leads me to, another leader that I worked for that, honestly, I would not be in sales if this individual hadn't been my boss. After I worked with Dave and I shared this, Dave actually, because he was a great sales leader, he was recruited by another company. So Dave went off. I spent roughly 6 months with no first line sales leader. I had no formal sales training. So as you can imagine, I did what people in that role do. I worked my ass off. I mean, I knew how to manage my time. I knew how to pick up the phone. I prospect like you can't believe, and I demonstrate the product to basically anybody who would give me an hour of their time. I'm going to say I probably put 50,000 miles on my car. And in the first year of moving into sales, I did roughly 70% of my quota. Now, I was organized. I prioritized things. I was an incredible builder of pipeline and funnel for a lot of people that, frankly, were probably never going to buy anything. I didn't realize it. I didn't realize that my behavior really sort of created a pipeline that didn't have any depth to it. But I didn't have the experience. But through brute force, I wasn't that bad, but I wasn't that good. I'd do 70% one year, I'd do 110% the next year, and then I'd be back to 70%. What the boss that I did have at this time, he told me that my forecast looked like Denny's menu. And I didn't really know what that meant. And so I asked, and he said, "You got a lot of stuff on here. Problem is none of it's good." And, I pretty much understood, okay, I know where I sit with this individual. This is going to be challenging. And eventually, they said, "Listen, we can't live with the 70% anymore. We really do need you to move back into a solutions consulting role." They gave me a very lucrative compensation package. But honestly, I knew that if I could just figure out how to change my habits, I could do well in this type of career. And I knew the upside potential. So I said, as much as I appreciate it and as much as it hurts to take less money for a higher risk job, I wanted to stay in the career. So that was the, time that I moved on and went to work for another company. And the lessons I learned, I mean, number one is sales executives, honestly, we set the tone for how we are treated by prospects. If you do what I did, which is chase without really understanding the buyer's needs, the timeline, really qualifying things, you set yourself up for failure. And sometimes, in this case, I just needed to take a big risk. It was calculated, but honestly, it worked out because the next leader that I worked for kind of, I'm going to say, saved my career. I got lucky. The company I went to work for and the people I went to work for, it was Bill Velios and Monty Roy over at Information Builders. Those guys were great. They knew that I came from a competitor company. They knew I understood the market. They loved my work ethic. They loved my communication skills. They, saw the effort I put into pipeline building. So all those things were, good. But the results that they saw weren't dramatically different than what I had at Cognos. It was, reasonably good, but not great. The thing that Bill did for me was he's a super calm guy. Like, he's not an intense, in your face leader. He's a very methodical, smart, great negotiator, calm as can be. And he basically just sat down and he said, something. He's like, "I don't know what it is about what you're doing, because everything I see is spot on what I want you to do." Until he got me to walk through a sales cycle and just sort of in detail explain, like, how was I thinking about the sales process step by step? Walk me through when you're prospecting. Help me understand what that first meeting was like. Help me understand how you get the client to the next gate. Help me understand how you understand what gates exist before a client can buy. As I started to explain these things to him, it became very obvious to him that I had zero sales training, none. I had no formal process that I followed. I'm not going to say it was completely shooting from the hip, but it's what I had learned from watching salespeople and struggling through selling for 3 to 4 years. And so Bill did two things. He's like, number one, I want to send you to CRAS negotiation training. This training helps you start to put structure around how you're engaging with clients. So early in a sales process, you're thinking about what's your good, better, best offer going to be. It'll help you understand when prospect procurement people are asking you questions, what are they asking it for? Why are they asking it? And understanding what should be your anchor point for where you want to set this deal. And I'm going to say 5 minutes into the training I went to, light bulb goes on, and it's a little painful because for the next couple of days, I got to sit there and literally relive every disastrous sales cycle I'd had over the last 4 years. I mean, I sit there and vividly remember the conversation where, I gave away the store. I just did not know how to run a process, and I did not understand how early negotiation starts in a sales cycle. Bill and Monty did one thing that was even a bigger step. They said, we want to assign you, A, we're going to coach you, but B, we want to assign you to a senior executive salesperson. His name's Lynn Morrow. And like Bill, Lynn's probably one of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. He does not drive fear and intimidation to get people to work. He's just super calm and again, started to walk me through this is what a normal sales process would look like in the training that he's gone through. And he helped shadow me on different sales calls. And I brought it up with Dave. He didn't dive on the grenade. He didn't tell me this is what you need to do. We prep before we go in for any call, and we get off the call and we debrief. And I got to tell you, he not only helped me improve my performance, he took me from being, I would say, a C salesperson into a B player. And it was the approach he used, how he was calm and methodical and helping me really learn it on my own. And the second thing Bill did that was kind of funny is he's like, you just need to get rid of quota brain. And I did not understand what quota brain was. But in essence, he just said, listen, and knowing Bill is not somebody who just throws money around. The guy has made a great deal of money, but he lives a very modest lifestyle. He does things he enjoys doing, but he's not extravagant. And he said sales executives who are concerned about quota, who are concerned about money, they don't behave like rational people. He said the best sales executives he's ever worked for or worked with, they don't really need the money. And because of that, they're able to stay super focused on what the customer's needs are. Everything's about what they're trying to do. Because their brain can be focused on the moment, when weird things happen in a sales process, they're not freaking out and they're not doing things that are not logical. They're acting like people who, not that they don't want to earn the business, but they don't need the business. And that was a light bulb moment. Those three people, Bill, Monty, and walking there, I really did start to feel like I have something that's like making a cake. I got a recipe I can go follow. My brain is unscrambled, and the stress that I had just pretty much gone. So that was a monumental change for me. And I'm sure
Very
you
good.
probably heard others go into something similar.
Well, yes, and everybody's experience takes them someplace. I mean, you talked about a sales process, and so many companies actually do not have a sales process, or at least if they do have one, it's not very well defined. And many of the reps in the field don't follow it. They simply do what you talked about. They just do whatever comes natural to them, whatever they're comfortable with. They kind of do that because if the sales process is not well defined, then they just kind of abandon it and it doesn't quite work for them. But it's like you called it a recipe, I believe. That's
Yeah.
exactly what it is. You'll never end up with the cake being good if you don't follow the recipe. And so by doing that, it allows you to have a finished product of success. Selling takes a set of skills, follow a process, and you get it done. Leaders are the ones that are able to do that. Leaders are the ones that are able to say, here's what you want to do because they have a visionary outlook on life. And so when you're to your point, when you're working with different people in different groups and all the things you've learned from Dave and other leaders, it's helped equip you with to be able to do that. And more managers should really understand that they're not just I believe you called it a super rep. That's not what they are. They're like trying to take a team and develop them. I do want to ask you a couple of things around failure, because you've been quite transparent, certainly
Mhm.
opened up on some of the errors, mistakes, and failures that you've had in life. And that's a wonderful quality to be transparent like that. There's a difference, I believe, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, between the way managers take failure and the way leaders take failure. And before you respond to that, you said something that was around fear and how the individuals you cited did not lead by a way of fear. So many people today have bosses, managers who manage through intimidation, through
Yep.
fear. Some of it's spoken, some of it is unspoken. It could be a look because, we communicate more non-verbally. So they could give you a
Yeah.
look that can, shimmy you back. So what are your thoughts around this failure piece and how that relates to a manager related to how that might relate to a leader and how they respond to it?
So I think different people in a leadership role that I've worked where I would categorize as managers versus leaders. That is one of the things that I look for personally, is that I want to find people who can inspire people, who can reach people, who can build enough trust with their direct reports and their extended team where they can get people to want to do, honestly, to invest in the change that's necessary for them to be able to find another level of performance. Um, those who can inspire, those who can motivate in that way are people I 1000% want to put in front of a team. Um, on the flip side, I, you know, do I think that managers who use fear as a tool to drive behavior can get results? They absolutely can. Over the short term, um, individuals will work a gazillion hours a week. They'll kill themselves to try and show that they're doing everything to be effective, but probably 60% of the work they do tends to be work to avoid the pain associated with not doing what the leader is looking for them to do. And I feel like if that's where the effort is placed and it's not, a trusting relationship with someone who's working their can off to try and inspire people, it's toxic for a team. It's toxic for a business. And I'm not listing everybody I worked for because I worked for a broad set of people. Hopefully that gives you a perspective because it wasn't all roses. Um, but the next little, I'm going to call it pretty sizable failure, uh, took me into an opportunity where I really got a chance to sort of see what an organization looks like when they put together the right culture for training. Um, so I hate to take us back into the failure stage, but I think it's important for people to understand. Um, Once again, as Dave had moved on, all things do come to an end. And so in this case, unfortunately, Bill Velios was promoted. I started the following year. I had a good sales process to follow. Bill and Lynn and Monty had kind of unscrambled my brain. Things were looking pretty promising. I had sold a decent sized deal the year prior, and that same client was actually starting a project that if we won the business, it would be nearly 4 times my quota. So very excited about an opportunity of that size. In fact, my new boss, he was super excited about the opportunity. He was so excited that we started to schedule weekly calls to do planning. Those weekly calls turned into daily calls to do planning. The daily calls turned into executive briefings and R&D sessions and marathon negotiation planning. In fact, we invested so much time in that massive opportunity. We didn't really leave a lot of time for, pipeline building. So a still an inexperienced salesperson who felt like they had a pretty good handle on this customer. You can imagine that when you get notified that, the customer is going to go in a different direction, that the response is what any rational person would do. Yeah, what you don't want to do. We just decided we're going to invest even more time in convincing the customer that they were making a bad decision. Now, I know that, whenever you're working a large opportunity, you need to try and stay engaged and you need to try and win that deal. But you also need to recognize when you've invested too much time, you've got to move on and find new ways to earn business. So let me just say that the lesson I learned was, uh, you really need to, if you're out there swinging for home run deals, and that's how you're going to make your number, you better line up your forecast with a lot of singles and doubles. I always started the year following this experience, planning my quota based on making average deals add up to hit my number, and those big deals got me to 200%. Having a pipeline of those small, medium-sized deals did something else for me, and that is when you got enough in the funnel, when the bigger deals start to get crazy and they start to ask for things that obviously are not going to be a logical concession, you can confidently say, I don't think it's going to fit. Like, I would do it if we could, but unfortunately we can't. But to do that, you gotta have the right kind of pipeline. You gotta have a consistent process to be able to fill the funnel. Now, fortunately for me, I mean, it was a bad lesson learned. After 5 years at Information Builders, it was definitely time for a change. And I got to say, I fell into, probably besides, my wife, who I've been married to for 30 years and having two wonderful kids, probably the third best thing that happened to me in my entire life, going to work at Concur. Holy cow, I could not have been luckier. First day I went there, I actually went to a sales training, would have been new hire training. It was in Seattle. First day I was there, they had 2 days of Sandler training as part of the new hire training. Quick shout out to a guy named Bob Gregoire, if he ever listens to this. I mean, it was life changing what I learned in a couple of days. During those 2 days, I learned how my very organized prospecting process looked more like a dog chasing a tennis ball down the road. I also realized my version of doing discovery probably felt more like a police interrogation to the customer. But I walked out of that room and I said, this is something that I can see myself doing. This is a much more natural approach for me. And I committed that the habits that I had, no different than when I changed my time management habits, I was going to understand how this sales technique training worked, and I was going to follow that Sandler process to the T. The benefit to me, and this is why, I brought up having great leadership, is the material itself was fabulous. And I think if you follow a really good sales process and invest the time, it's great. But the difficulty is most of the time when you leave the training and you come back, that's the last time you probably talk about it. You got a binder on your shelf that you may or may not look at, and it really gets difficult to try and implement it when you're on the phone and you're working with a client. However, I worked at Concur at a time where Mike Eberhard, who ran our sales organization, had brought Sandler in. Guy LaCourte probably is more in-depth in Sandler and more of a Sandler prophet than anyone I know. And I worked directly for a guy named Jim Malpede. And those guys believed in this approach to their core. They designed everything about our sales process from, how we would have account reviews to how we would discuss where we were at in the deal. We had a common, almost Sandler language where they understood where I was in the sales process. They understood what gate I was in. They understand what blockers or challenges that I was running into. And they understood what next steps I was going to take because the language was consistent across all teams. You rarely are in a situation where you're trying to learn something new, and yet everywhere you turn around, it's front and center. They gave me audio tapes to listen to. Jim bought these for me, sent them to me. I listened to them so many times, it was like listening to a Seinfeld episode where you know the next line. You know what they say and you can finish the sentence. And when it got to that point, I could find myself in a conversation with a customer without really thinking about it. I would be digging a level deeper. I would actually be trying to uncover pain. I would be doing things like negative reverses and just trying to test and understand where is the customer at and their commitment to change. And I got to tell you, when that took place, I, that was the last time I was ever, they call it an at-leaster. From that point forward, for the next 7 years, I was never below number 3 in the company. And it wasn't all just Sandler. Time management played a key role, understanding how to make sure that I was prospecting so that I had a funnel that was full, making sure that I was on message so that when I was in front of a client, they could remember what I was doing. But I got to tell you that that level of investment that Mike Eberhard, Guy LaCourte, and Jim Malpete put into getting me to get my brain in a structured way was life changing. And the lesson I took away from that, and I used it later on when I was actually in a role at higher level, is most sales executives, they don't have a degree in selling. Like, I went to school to be a computer programmer. So how do you learn? And don't assume that somebody who looks to be good on the surface as a salesperson has any sales process or any good sales technique in the way they work. They may be good on their feet, but that doesn't mean they really have a recipe to follow. And that number two, that implementing sales training, you know, it can deliver incredible results, but you really got to have consistent reinforcement, and it's got to be from the top down, and it's got to be embedded in everything. Anything short of that tends to be very short-lived in its use, very fit, and then we're back to business as usual. So hopefully that gives you a sense. These are some of, I would call it key influential leaders that I just was privileged to be able to work for, where I had not been in a leadership role at this point, but man, did those guys really set the stage so that when I got in the seat, I wasn't trying to figure out what to do. So hopefully that helps.
Oh man, those are some great nuggets. We call those pearls of wisdom and nuggets. I hope that all the guys that have had a hand in creating who you are, I hope that they know what an impact they've made in your life. If you have not reached back out to them, I would reach out to them and let them know that they have truly made an impact. For you to make it all the way to the chief operating officer spot at Concur, believe me, the impact, the leadership that they showed you, the things that they imparted in you, which is what all good leaders should do. I mean, we all strive to make an impact into someone else's life, especially their professional career. And the things that they've done, I really hope that you've had an opportunity to reach back out, touch them, and say, hey, thank you, because you've created what I ultimately became. And so many of the nuggets and pearls of wisdom that you just shared comes from good leadership, not from a manager that was just doing the, day-to-day operational stuff, perhaps even managing through fear, but someone that had a vision and was a visionary, and they could make you who you are. So that's really good. I'm glad to hear your story very much. In fact, I think that the audience has been enjoying this as much as I have. And I'd like to, before we end, give you an opportunity to say or offer any other pearls of wisdom that maybe you thought about but didn't say, or maybe something that you wanted to say. Give you an opportunity to address our audience once again with any of the nuggets that you might have. Eric, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I think, I'll sort of wrap things up with, I'll touch on one other leader, and I think do a broad brush across many leaders I worked for. And I think prior to moving into a leadership role, these are the people and the things that I saw them do that helped set the stage for my success, and honestly, at every level. I was fortunate in 2016 to have another great leader, and Christelle Graham, call me about taking lead on a brand new sales opportunity where we were going to split our sales teams into new business and client sales. She asked me to take on something called strategic client sales, which was basically selling add-on products to our largest clients. And the job was going to have a massive quota. I had no sales executives to start the year and managed people. So she took a big chance in putting me in the role. And honestly, I thought at the beginning of the year, I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I was getting buried 17 ways from Sunday. I traveled to nearly 30 states in the first 6 months of that job. Um, but I had one big benefit, and it felt like a punishment prior, and that is because because Concur grew so much in the 7 years I was an individual contributor. I literally had 8 bosses. Sounds horrible, and at the time, it certainly felt horrible because every 12 months I get that phone call that says, "Hey, Eric, your territory is changing, and you're going to be reporting to somebody you've never met before." At the time, I thought it was a bad joke, and it wasn't a funny joke. But the reality is, I got a chance to work for some such good leaders that I got a chance to see how did they lead the team? How did they manage the team? How did they motivate the team? Jim Malpete, who I mentioned earlier, he was as disciplined about let's be organized, let's build our weekly plan, let's go execute against our weekly plan. And everything we did was focused around reinforcement of Sandler and Sandler processes. I owe him for basically retraining my brain into being able to be very natural and fluid in that process. I worked for a guy named Doug Adamick, who he is a legend within our organization. He would constantly say, just progress, not perfection. Don't worry about whether or not what you did is perfect. Let's just get a little bit better each time we do it. And I got to tell you, he 1000%, he eliminated any fear, and he gave me incredible confidence to go execute something I've never done before on deals the size that honestly they made me nervous. And I had the benefit of being on a team where I got to see firsthand. I saw the culture he created, and I saw why he got everybody to club. And when you start to see that, these are things you can emulate. One other shout out, I worked for a guy named Tom Mady. And I got to tell you, I've never worked with anybody who's better at negotiating big deals and has no problem with tension or pressure. He is as calm an individual as you can possibly get. And every one-on-one I would have with him, it was like the most nurturing hour of my week. And I learned that he created such trust with his team that he could get them to open up. And those things, when I was in the holy crap, I'm leading people through chaos, I was able to sit back and say, God, I got a laundry list of people that had skills that I was able to adapt to and take with me that have been critical in every level of my success. So the lesson I learned is, if you look around, pay attention to the people that you work with, the people you work for, and imagine yourself in a leadership role and try and emulate the behaviors that you think are critical to their success and your success. Take those with you. You'll find that the people that are around you are incredibly talented. And if you can make the thing that it won't be exactly the way they do it, but if you can start to take those concepts and apply them to your teams, you'll find over time you'll have great success because you got a really, really good foundation. So hopefully that helps, Eduardo. I very much appreciate the opportunity to share. This has been very soul searching in putting this together, and I hope it's helpful for the people who listen.
I'm sure it is. And thank you so much for sharing all that you shared as a sales leader, certainly all the reps that worked for you and everything that they've learned comes from you, or not everything, but certainly a lot comes from you. And then, of course, the things that you've learned that you've shared with all the people you gave a shout out to. I thought that was wonderful. And hopefully several of those people will be listening and they'll be able to just feel gratified that they had such a great part in your success. So thank you so much, Eric. I appreciate that. And to all that have been listening, thank you so much once again for joining us on this episode of the Inside Scoop. We hope that something was said that made you think, aha, that's me. I can do that. I can make those changes. If you did, we certainly encourage that you subscribe and become part of our viewership. So once again, thank you for joining. And until the next episode, we bid everyone a goodbye and have a wonderful day. Bye for now.
For more exclusive leadership insights, be sure to subscribe to the Inside Scoop on YouTube and Spotify. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit that share button and spread the word. See you next time on the Inside Scoop.